Welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast, where we feature conversations with entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and artists. Well, welcome back to the Agents of Innovation podcast. I'm your host, Francisco Gonzalez, and I'm here in the global, the center of the global hotspot, Brickell in Miami. I'm here at the home, and actually I should say the home art studio of my friend Joe Yonke. Joe, welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to be on it with you.
Yeah, so it's another beautiful day in Miami. As you see the great scene behind us here, Joe is an artist, a painter, and we're going to get to his story in just a moment. But for those of you that might be joining us for the first time, or maybe the 148th time, or wherever we're at now, make sure that you subscribe to the Agents of Innovation podcast so you can be the first to learn about stories like Joe Yonke's and many other entrepreneurs that we have had and will have on the podcast going forward. So, we're on all the platforms, Spotify, Apple. If you're listening and you want to watch this and see the beautiful studio apartment here that we're in Brickell, actually a visual here of me and Joe talking, you could actually get on YouTube. And this is also on YouTube. Also, we have now had a lot of featured innovators that have been on the podcast that have joined the Fearless Journeys community to be able to help members that join the community connect and learn directly from them. So if you like listening to some of these featured innovators on a podcast, why not connect with them in person? We do a lot of in-person meetups, a lot of online sessions, and also some great group trips. In fact, in just a number of days here, Joe's going to join us in Wynwood for Joe and Alexander McCobin, Eric Wind, and Davide Proietti, 4 featured innovators in the Fearless Journeys community, for a great dinner at a wonderful Argentine restaurant called Piagatti Ristorante. It's a famous restaurant that's actually been in Buenos Aires for many years, but of course everybody has to have a location in Miami now, so they have a brand new location in Miami, and so we like to do group trips to places like Argentina. We've done 2 group trips there. But when we can't be in Argentina, we bring Argentina to the United States and in Miami. So we've got a number of people signed up already. Just the last couple days here to sign up. If you want to join us, go to fearlessjourneys.org and visit the travel page. We also got some great group trips coming up to Guatemala in January and the Dominican Republic in February. So we'll have more on the calendar later. But let's get back now to this great conversation we're about to have with Joe Yonke. So Joe, we're here in Miami. How old are you now?
I'm 24. Going to be 25 soon, though, in November.
Yeah, so coming up on the ripe old age of 25. But, we met through our mutual friend, Ronak Patel, and he was on a previous episode of the Agents of Innovation podcast as well. So you guys have known each other for quite some time, right? Yeah,
we've known each other for a few years. I think it's been probably 4 years now. It hasn't been super long, but we hit it off right away, and we became super close friends, I think, within months of knowing each other, yeah. Yeah,
and I think Ronak connected us pretty much right after you got to Miami last year.
Yeah, he's good about that. He likes connecting people, and I think it was right around when I either moved here, right before I was sort of moving in. I think that's when he did it, yeah.
Yeah, he's great. A great connector, likes to do that, and every time he's rolling through South Florida as well. Mm-hmm. I know he's off in medical school now down on the island of Antigua. But anyway, we'll see him soon. But back to your story. I know you grew up in Pennsylvania. I know Ron did as well.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit though, Joe. I'm looking around and people can see some of the art here, but I can actually see more on the other side of this camera. Really beautiful art. This is actually the first time I've seen it in person, but I see your Instagram. You always post these. You have a great website as well, where people can find your art. You don't just create art. It's your business. It's your livelihood. Mm-hmm. You sell it. You do pretty well. It's also, it's beautiful art. It's really great. But I want to ask you, you're 24 years old. It's hard to believe. I don't know what Picasso was doing when he was 24, but it's, how long have you been actually painting? What inspired you to first start doing art in general?
Yeah, well, I grew up painting and drawing. It's been really my strongest interest for my whole life. My grandfather is an artist, and he's been an artist for most of his life. So I was basically raised painting and drawing. And I spent a lot of my childhood doing that. I mean, in elementary school, it'd be every recess, and then after school, and then on the weekends, I go to my grandparents' house. I'm very close with them. And my grandfather had this basement studio in Pittsburgh where we would spend pretty much the whole weekend just making art. And he'd have like the fishing channel on the TV, and they're just great memories. He's still a great friend. I mean, he's one of my best friends. We spoke like last night for an hour on the phone. We talk frequently, and he's been a big influence on me and has taught me a lot as far as creating strong artwork goes, as far as like design and those elements that make a compelling piece of work, such as a painting. But yeah, so it's really been my main interest. And then high school, I had a good teacher as well, but I was sort of concerned with more sports and things like that, and maybe girls and other things. But I kept with it for the most part, and then college came around, and then I got really into being a college student. I didn't go to art school because I didn't think I'd fit in there. So I went to Penn State, and I definitely initially partied and joined Greek life and things like that. And then, COVID happened, and we had those restrictions. Penn State was pretty locked down, but I became president of my fraternity during that time, which was not a very smart move because it was just so challenging. But after that was my sophomore year, and then after that, I really returned to it, and I spent literally the rest of my college experience working 24/7 to like build things up, and it caught a lot of tractions. But I spent pretty much every waking hour outside of classes to try to build up this business and make it into something. And a lot of that, I mean, the fun part is just making the work, and a lot of that comprised of really painting a lot, but also just trying to figure out ways to be enterprising and make it an actual viable thing, because up until my senior year, I still thought I'd have to have a job in an industry such as marketing, which was essentially my major. And I had like a minor in data analytics. But fortunately, like right towards the end, it was like, oh, this, like, all things considered, seems like it's going to definitely be viable. And then now we're, looking back a year out of college, it's proven to be that. And I do work 100 hours a week, but it's fun because it's extremely rewarding, and you get to have this organism that, like, with your podcast or your Fearless Journeys, it's like something you feed and it just grows, and that becomes quite exciting. So you can sort of just continually ride that wave of motivation that you get from it. So it's been great. I mean, but that's really the whole story as far as like where I started to this point in time. Yeah.
Well, just to pick up on something you said there, at this point, you say you're working about 100 hours a week. I know not every week's the same, but can you give us like a generality of what do you spend that 100 hours on? Are you simply up there in your loft studio painting, or are you doing other things as well?
A lot of it's painting. I would say 70 to 80% when you take from week to week and consider it. But yeah, it does vary a lot from, like, a lot of times we'll be meeting up with people that might lead to a sale, or someone who knows somebody that will be good to talk to, or I go to an art show and I meet people who are involved in the art community here, and usually that leads to good stuff as well. So it's kind of, you have to be creative. You have to come up with ways to sort of get things to that next level, or meet another mark of like, okay, I started out here. What's the next objective? Well, I should probably grow my network a little bit. And then you put some time into that, and they're like, all right, now I can go back to painting. And but generally, I would say, yeah, most of my week does comprise of painting. Yeah,
because it sounds like not only is it the fun, it's like the love, right? Like the painting itself. But people have to be aware, right? You have to build, like you said, you have to network, go to art shows, maybe post things on Instagram, like wherever you're getting your stuff out, maybe on your website.
A lot of different types of marketing for sure. Especially when I started to grow the Instagram and then grow my online presence, it was things like SEO and I did some paid advertising as well. which now I don't do anymore. Everything's organic, and it should stay that way. But
that's good.
Yeah, I mean, to get things going, I really tried to put myself in the mind of okay, how can I run this as a business, because that's what's going to make it actually able to pay the bills. And luckily or fortunately got it to that point.
So you didn't go to art school. You went to Penn State. When I think of Penn State, I think of Happy Valley. I think of 100,000 crazy football fans.
Yeah.
You were in Greek life. You were the head of a fraternity at some point.
Yeah.
I'm sure they kept you busy, and
Yeah.
I'm sure you had fun. But what did you actually study in school?
It was really, it's the major is advertising, and then the minor is digital media, trends, and analytics, but all the advertising classes were essentially just marketing classes. So I think, to sort of put it as basically as possible, I just had a degree in marketing. But yeah, that's what I studied. I did well. I was like junior year, I got the scholarship. One student out of my class was chosen for. So I performed well as a student in that regard. And I was very involved with extracurriculars. Actually, now that sort of comes up, I did spend a lot of my time outside the classroom painting and building up that business. But I also spent a lot of time doing extracurriculars because I was trying to build my college resume to get a favorable job in, say, marketing after school. So, I mean, it was just crazy. Freshman year was partying, and then I joined the fraternity, and then right after that year, it was just right into being president, which was not much play. It was just sort of keeping things afloat, not getting in trouble during COVID, and also somehow keeping the brothers happy. And it was quite a challenge, but I learned a lot from it. But then I ended up leaving the fraternity after that year, and that's where I spent because a lot of kids will go to college and party. I really, and this is sort of crazy to say, even every time I say it, looking back on it, I think it was under 10 times. I would say it was 7 times total where I actually left my place to do something social that didn't relate to work at all. I would just leave, go to extracurricular stuff, go to class, and then I would maybe if there's something that I could possibly do in state college to help with my business, I would do that. But I didn't go out and party then for a single period of time my last 2 years of college, and sophomore year was being president. But yeah, it was crazy. I just was super dedicated, and I mean, it worked, because if I would have stayed in the fraternity, I wouldn't be a full-time artist right now. I probably would have not been making art consistently, not really put time into.
So you actually left the fraternity?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Wow.
And if I wouldn't have done that and would have kept doing, sticking to this plan, and that time that I would have then not put into this, then would have caused me to just go into marketing or something. And so it's crazy how you have these little turn of event, these changes in time of even for such a concentrated period, just college, where it was the one decision really changed the whole course of my life.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I want to back up a little bit. So you've been actually, I don't know, creating art, painting, I don't know, drawing, whatever.
Yeah.
Since you were a kid?
Yeah, really young.
Inspired by your grandfather, you mentioned?
Yeah, you can see that photo that's on the top shelf, me holding the white T-shirt, right? You see that over there?
Yeah.
That is this shark. Yeah. Well, this blanket is that, you can see how it matches up with the blanket here.
Let's put it right here.
Yeah. Sounds good. And so that was me in first grade, to give you an idea. That drawing that's now on the T-shirt.
Wow.
I made that in.
And that's that
yeah,
on the towel.
And I made that in a recess class during first grade. Like I said, during every recess, and then after school, I'd be drawing and painting. And that was a drawing I made during recess, first grade. And it was a shark, obviously bloody teeth, something a first grade boy would like to draw. And what we did with it was I brought it home. I was very proud of it. And my grandfather, who, got me into art, and my aunt, who manages my grandfather's art business, or his art career, the business aspect of it, they saw him you have to sign that. So I signed it, and you can see underneath the shark, it's literally, it's funny because I tell the story all the time, but how I signed it is exactly how my grandfather told the story from all the years, where I took the pencil and I wrote JOSE, and I had to think about it. Apparently I was not very smart in first grade, and I took a pause and I wrote PH, and they read it, and it says, and they were like, oh, that says Jose PH, and then they got this nickname for me, which you probably saw on my website. But regardless, it's just we printed it on a T-shirt because we take a family trip to Hilton Head we used to take a family trip to Hilton Head every year, and we started this tradition where we wore the T-shirt one day and took a family photo on the beach. But it's just like that just gives you an idea of like, yeah, it's been a huge part of my life for my whole childhood. And this is actually a
So at what
tangible
point
example. Did
you kind of decide that you wanted to be an artist as a career?
So after I left the fraternity, I was spending, it was always a childhood dream, but after I left the fraternity and I was spending a lot of time just making work because I wanted that kind of outlet, I just needed to get it out of me, I guess, and I returned to it sort of viscerally. That's when I decided, okay, this really means a lot to me, and I will probably regret not trying to make this work as a career. Yeah.
So you just said, I'm gonna go for it. Mm-hmm. And you decided on, what you're creating here is abstract art.
Yeah, essentially. The real technical term is neo-abstract expressionism, where you have this sort of abstract figure, which is the predominant subject of my work, which is, this character I developed, which has this story behind that I'm sure we'll get into. But the actual technical term is neo-abstract expressionism. And that will continue. I think it's, it's what I'm compelled to make the most. And the character does have a lot of meaning behind it. But, to put it basically, I do tell people who don't really understand those terms that I'm an abstract artist, yeah.
Yeah, and what is it about abstract art or neo-abstract expressionism that what drew you to focus on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. My grandfather paints in a way that's very loose, and it's not. He's painted realism, and I've painted realism before, but I think we were both compelled to make this kind of very expressive work that then lent itself to make the most sense for me to sort of join the neo-abstract expressionist, movement or style, because it's what I kept being drawn to. Like you saw the two paintings that I made when I was a kid in my bedroom, and those are paintings that they're fully abstract expressionist work, but then this neo movement that happened around like the Basquiat era was sort of like included the figure, and like maybe it was fractured or abstracted, but it was still a part of this abstract genre. And since I painted like that so consistently throughout my life, again, like just when it came down to it, just like this is the work that really stimulates me and seems the most true to how I tend to, or like have this proclivity to make artwork.
So about how long does each piece of art take you?
It definitely depends, and a lot of times what I do is I work on it for a while, and it's tough because for these characters that are completely just like made up out of no basis, such as like if I was painting realism, I could just look at a picture.
Yeah.
Like you have to come up with all these elements that then will make the work compelling. So what I'll have to do is like I'll sit with it for a while, work on it, sit on the couch, stare at it, like up there you saw the couch, where I do the painting, and it's like this really sort of meticulous process where like, okay, since there's no, like it has to be completely come out of my imagination what goes next. It's kind of like this exercise that you have to go through, and it can be kind of like exhausting, like it would be to actually do like lifting weights or something, because you're like causing your brain to do this completely unusual function that like such as if I was just sitting on my laptop doing some kind of administrative work, it's a completely different kind of thought process. But yeah, it's and now I'm starting to forget the original question, but I think
about how long it takes.
And because that process, that's the process I go through. I have to be like, all right, this is done for now. I can't possibly think of anything else. And then I make more work. Say a few months later, I'm more informed then, because every moment you spend painting, you evolve and you develop. And then I'm able to be more informed and return to that piece. And now like I was saying to the one above the TV here, that was one I had set for a long time, and that I was able to make into a lot better work of art because it was exactly that process. But yeah, it's really something that I'm starting to understand or realize more, that I'm like actually trying to consider the process here and like what leads to certain things, because I want to like foster as unique and recognizable of a style and application of medium that can be tied to me and who I am as an artist. So it's been good to consider that process.
So speaking of process, what is the process that you go through when you're deciding what to paint next?
If I have an idea or something that I like that I made in a painting that I'm working on, then I'm like, okay, I want to try this in the next. But it's very like spur of the moment. There's this movement called action painting that like Jackson Pollock did, where it's very like you work intensely for periods of time and then you sit back but you work on it in this process called action painting, where it tends to be you take your medium, generally painting, you apply it and you try to form something. And that's what I generally do. I start blocking color down in different elements to create these characters, and that's what really can build out one of these paintings. But I mean, to go back to the question before, is like maybe 80 hours, right? Like where like all said and done, like 80 to 100 hours, I would say on average, is like what we'll go into them. The bigger ones take a bit more, but I'm saying like one of these, like the one that's next to the stairs here, a painting like that, I would say. And like this one behind us, we can see it, but it's not even close to being done. This one's probably 40 hours in. So yeah, I'm under halfway.
So that's not done. It's not finished yet.
No.
Are the rest of the things I'm seeing in this room all finished other than this, or are you still working
a lot of them I'll just hang them for a while, and then I just live with them and I look at them, and oftentimes I'll think of something to add, like the big painting that's with the red background. That one I'm going to add to, but I made it this summer and I still need time to think about it. I've been adding a bit to it as I've been painting since I've been back, but it's that's, for an example, one that's going to change a lot. The abstract here, that's a painting that I've added significantly to, and really like made a concerted effort to try to evolve in a more in a smaller window or period of time, and it's coming along well. But I wouldn't say it's done. But it's I'm becoming happy with it. So it's getting to the point where it's almost done. It probably has around 100 or so hours into it, and yeah, it's.
I feel like, so I'm not an artist, but I'm a writer.
Yeah.
And I feel like if I felt like, I'm trying to think
being
of
a writer is an artist.
But I'm trying to think of an analogy here in terms of I've written an article, or I've written a book.
Yeah.
And I'm done with it, and I know I'm done with it, and that's it. It's over. And the analogy here I think I'm trying to get to is, it's almost like if I was a writer and I wrote everything and then I left that, but I know it's not done. I know I'm going to come back to it. Like that's kind of what you're doing. You're like, let me think about it a little while. Let me see if I feel like I'm good with this.
Yeah.
And maybe you're good with it and you never come back and add anything to it. And that might be the same thing for like a writer who writes a book. Like maybe it's like, this is it, I'm good, I'm done. Sometimes I'm done writing something. If I feel at least good enough about it, I want to just like close it down and go on to the next thing. And I got a lot of other things I want to write. You got a lot of other things you want to paint. So just trying to think of that. But I guess this leads me to my next question a little bit. And I think it's going to be a little broader in terms of thinking about this. But, so considering what I just talked about, maybe you're working on multiple different pieces that aren't done yet. Maybe you've put it on the wall, you're walking around your apartment, you're thinking about it for a week or a month or several months, while you're also up there working on other things. At the same time, we live now in a world with more distractions than ever before. We have these phones that We are always supposed to be available 24/7, email, text, all sorts of social media, all these things. Not to mention just other busyness things of life.
Yeah.
How do you stay focused when trying to work on art?
Yeah, I like this question because it's also, funny enough, something I've been thinking about a lot, because I grew up with horrible ADD and I still have it.
Well, I can see from your art.
Yeah, for sure, and it definitely shows itself one way or another, and that sort of like lends its, or indicates my process too, right? Where I'm like, I have to go into something else and then sort of come back to something, because a lot of times like these will become where you're in that process of like really trying to come up with ideas. Like it can be a tough like kind of, you have to be very problem solving, ironically, and like be able to take yourself through these steps of like where you're really you have to like push these ideas out of yourself, and it's been really tricky. And so because of that, I think it causes me to be like, all right, give myself another cookie, if you will, and go into another painting and get the satisfaction that comes with making another work of art that I can then apply that same process to. And I think because I'm so deliberate in that regard, I think that is making the work materialize in a way that does really, even like such as the elements that go into it, like the way that's done and the fashion it's done in. I think it's becoming more and more unique to me specifically. So it's, yeah.
So when you're working, you're up there in your studio, you're working on something. I imagine, are you putting your phone in do not disturb? Are you turning it off? What, like, do you have a time where you're like, I'm going to spend the next 3 hours on something with you're hungry, you're thinking about lunch, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like what is it that you like really try to put your like, do you like, how do you focus in that sense?
It's so hard to tune everything out, and I do put my phone on do not disturb, but I mean I do find myself like, and the tricky part is like I don't want to be distracted, but having those distractions in my life can directly influence what I'm making so often that it's almost like a necessary evil. But yeah,
so
I mean,
the distractions can be good.
They can be good, but it can be tough though when I'm really like, all right, this is what I need to make. I know exactly what I want to do here, and then to still have those, like, that can get frustrating. But yeah, I mean, I will completely not answer messages for long periods of time.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and
I'm like texting Ronak like months ago, like I'm trying to hang out with Joe. Like, he hasn't responded to anything in a month. He's such a nice guy. Where's he at? He's like, yeah, no, don't take that personal.
All my friends,
that's him.
they know how I am, and therefore, like, because this kind of this trying to think of how to refer to it. I guess again, this process of making the work, I have to give a lot of attention to. And having sort of extra things that are really coming through my consciousness, such as like an everyday interaction, I will sit up there in my studio and then it's on my mind. And then it can sometimes be harder to come up with certain things. Like, it's all like, the distractions are good. Maybe I see something interesting and that's great. But if it's like a social interaction, so that's why I like have to mitigate them sometimes. I'll just be running it through my head. And I'm sure you have this thing happen during like when you're in your writing process where you're just thinking about it. And then I start to get frustrated. I'm like, all right, I know what I'm going to do now. I'm going to completely shut out the world and just be able to put myself. One of my favorite artists, his name is Josh Smith. And he says you have to make a world around yourself to make the work that is, especially in the kind of work that him and I make, we're in essentially the same genre of artwork. That's like true to you. That's completely rooted in this world, in this environment, in this like kind of aesthetic display that you're trying to present to people. And it couldn't be more true. And because of that, I have to continually, I've real life stuff come up. Like I had some health issues. I did, see doctors and stuff, and like that'll take you out of it. But then once you return to it, you have to respect it, and you have to cultivate that world again. And I mean, that's, we're sitting right now in what's essentially the world that I've created for myself. And it's one that is representative of me as an artist.
Yeah, for sure. Well, just thinking about that a little bit, it's funny because I kind of envy what you do a little bit in the sense that you seem to be, you have a 100% focus on one thing, mostly art. I mean, yes, you have sales and you have shows and you have networking. I've got like a lot of things going on. Plus I'm a writer.
Yeah.
So it's like when you have that, you do. I mean, there are days that I'm just like, okay, today or maybe I'm thinking about 2 days from now, Saturday, like I'm turning my phone off. I'll, for the whole day.
Yeah.
I'll even tell people ahead of time, like, hey, if you can't reach me, this is why, like whatever, like if somebody I think might expect to reach me. But I think the biggest thing is you just have to, and sometimes it's also, for me as a writer, I don't have the luxury of just like you could do this just from home. I do write from home. But sometimes I have to actually go to a physically different place. Like I'll go to the library. Yeah. Even when there's people around, like it's, the library's a pretty quiet place. So even if there's like a little bit of noise, it's kind of an ambient noise in a sense.
Yeah.
But I'll just know like, hey, for the next 3 hours of the day, like I'm just going to focus on like working on this book. Boom, that's it. And whatever I get done. And sometimes I'm there 2 hours and I feel like, wow, I got it all done in 2 hours. I'll go home. Or sometimes it might be an extra hour. Like I might be there 4, but I think what's cool about what you've done here, and maybe that we can transition this to talking about your move to Miami, but you moved here just a little over a year ago. Yeah. You live in this condo tower here on Brickell. This place is blowing up. I mean, it's, I'm somebody who was born in Miami, grew up in South Florida, and now I run the Economic Club of Miami as well. But every single visit to downtown Miami or Brickell, it's like, oh, another building. I mean, we were just observing something else. Oh, what's that? I didn't know that was here. And I was just down at a coffee shop. It's, kind of almost near Brickell City Center. It's just, this place is buzzing. It's hopping. It doesn't really matter what time of day. I can be here at 10 in the morning, or I can be here at 4 in the afternoon, or obviously nighttime, which is what Miami's even more known for.
Yeah.
So it's a global hotspot. It's becoming a place that's not really that affordable for a lot of people anymore. It's becoming expensive. In some ways, that's a good thing because it just shows interest, right? It's a hot spot. But Joe, you were from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Went to school in the middle of Pennsylvania in Penn State. Yeah. As an artist, you didn't go to art school. And I think the first time I met you, I asked you this because I said, why did you choose is there a burgeoning art scene in Miami I'm not aware about? I'm thinking about places that people might think of, like New York or LA or maybe Europe, Paris, like whatever. Like think of like different artist hotspots, especially for a young artist who you might want to be around art shows and art people. So tell me why you chose Miami and what's going on here.
Yeah, there's a lot to it. I mean, it is, just to address that right off the bat, it is becoming an art city. You have pretty much wherever you have the most flourishing and developed cities, you'll have the most presence of like real high quality fine art. So for an example, you've had that with New York. New York is literally the epicenter of the art world. You have that with LA. LA has been, this amazing city that's vastly developed, and it's had this essentially this birth that Miami is now going through, where you have, everyone from all over the world is trying to live there. You have all these industries that are flourishing, and it's become, it's a port city, right? So you have pretty much every reason to live there. And when you have that much flourishing, it then allows, kind of this art scene to develop. And that's why you have, again, New York, which is still the top, and then LA's been great. And now, since Miami is becoming that kind of city as well, it's turning into that too. And you have a lot of really great artists that either grew up here that, like, there's a few names, but Alejandro Pinero Bello, he is now represented by one of the best galleries in the world, Pace Gallery. And he's in his 30s, so he's a young guy, especially young for the art world, and he's a part of this now Miami art movement that's very high quality and is up there with any other city with any other artist out there, especially in his age demographic. But yeah, and then like a couple that I have pieces from now, like Susan Kim Alvarez, like she's great, and Zoe, like these are two that are killing it right now, that are going to also be huge names, and they're Miami artists. I plan to be one of those names as well, and it's going really well. But it's when you it's cool to see. I'm glad that just sort of came together in the recent years upon moving here. But really, when it came down to it, like growing up in Pennsylvania and having long winters, and I would just get horrible seasonal depression, and I especially dealt with it, like say in high school and then college, where it just like completely took the life out of me. I knew like I've been to Florida, like I knew I was going to be happiest here. It's just the quality of life here is just so high. And it's completely worth it. And like, sure, Miami's expensive, but what you're paying for, all things considered, it goes way further here than like New York City.
Yeah, that's the one comparison, right? I mean, when you think about, I say it as somebody who grew up down here.
Yeah.
Like, I think people who have been here a while are like, wow, things are really getting expensive. But if you compare it to New York, still not on that level, not on the San Francisco level, not on the LA level, maybe not even on, I have family and friends that live in some parts of Colorado, and even there things can be expensive. So so I think that it's hopping. More and more people are moving down here for a lot of reasons. As I mentioned, being the head of the economic club of Miami, I meet people from all different professions, and it's just kind of interesting to hear the different stories of why people. But I think a lot of the consistency is what you said. When a place is hopping, it becomes a magnet. And Miami's becoming a magnet across a lot of professions, including art now. And I think what you said as well to the art world, that's really interesting. You could see it with dining as well, right? Like a lot of culinary arts are thriving here as well. Have you found any particular? I mean, there's some great. I don't know how you would compare it to, say, some of the great museums in New York. They're on another level, but we do have a number of art museums here in Miami, and there's also other neighborhoods and art studios and things like that. What's kind of the scene? Is there a place that people tend to be going, or a place that maybe we should pay attention to, like physically, geographically?
Allapattah, is that how you say it?
Allapattah?
Allapattah, A-H. Allapattah.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about?
The museum?
Allapattah?
Or is
no,
that
the part of Miami.
Oh, part of Miami.
Yeah,
Okay.
That's where like you have KDR. Which is Katia David Rosenthal. She moved to Miami. She's a New York dealer, and she opened a spot there. You have Andrew Reed Gallery, and you have Mindy Solomon. Like, those are great galleries, and they're all along this like strip in Allapattah, all next to each other, and those are great spots. So like that's a very common like art world, like people when they all go to meet up and go to shows, like that's a common spot. You have Ross Kramer Gallery, which is in South Beach, so in a different part of Miami. Great gallery, and Central Fine is right by them. But Ross Kramer's in New York Gallery, or their main gallery is in Chelsea, New York, but they have a spot here. They're scattered a bit, but yeah, I would say Allapattah is like a common place where I go to hang out with people that are involved with the art world. And like during Miami Art Basel time, when everyone comes to South Beach for the convention center, they'll find themselves at those galleries doing stuff too.
Now you've done some art shows. I know you've done some in New York and other places.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your experience doing some shows with your own art and maybe partnering with other artists as well.
Yeah, they've been great. The Soho, New York show that I did this month last year was the best that I like. As far as experience goes, just being able to have a show in Soho was very cool. And I would say that's been the highlight of it. But they're a ton of work, especially when I wasn't doing it with formal gallery representation. I was doing that all on my own, essentially.
Okay.
In like the Soho one, I did it with this artist who's a New York City.
So You say a lot of work. Is it part of it because like you live in Miami and you gotta like get your art all the
Yeah,
way
you got
to
to
New York?
transport the art there. You got to rent the storefront. You got to market the show. You got to get, and our marketing comes along with the invites. Like we had over 400 people show up to the Soho show. And I did that one with this guy who's a New York art veteran, who's in his 80s, Bill Rubinovich. And he is like, he was friends with Basquiat and knew Julian Schnabel, like, and he knew Warhol. Like,
Wow.
like he was familiar with all these people, was friendly with them, and they'd go all the shows, and he was a part of that community. So he's essentially a New York legend. So doing a show with him was cool, and I think he will eventually. His work's amazing. I think it'll eventually.
I remember when you were advertising that, and it almost looked like you got a legend who's probably, I don't know if any artist really retires, but it's probably, nearing that age of at least slowing down and retiring, maybe. And then you've got you, this up and comer, with all this kind of new energy coming. It seemed like a nice little contrast.
It was a great dynamic, and I mean, you stop when you die.
Yeah.
So he's still making work. I see his work pretty frequently. It's all great. You can see how many years of evolution have occurred. So it's very cool. Bill's a great guy. He's a great artist. I'm sure he'll be in the history books. It's been an honor to get to know him. I've had a show in Wynwood. That was great. A lot of people showed up for that, and it went well. But it's something about New York. It's just like that. As far as the art world goes, it's very special.
Do you have any art shows coming up or being planned?
No, since I've been doing a lot of selling through my studio, I'm just sort of leaving it to that for the time being. I think as I develop things, I will want to work with a good gallery, but I like having control right now and just taking things into my own hands. And then as I build up my reputation, I will pass a lot of things off to, what comes with a formal gallery representation.
So, getting back to where I started this, you came to Miami, and like I said, you decided to live in a studio apartment here. Well, I don't know, what do you call this? It's got like
sure. It's this. Yeah, I mean, I call it the studio.
Yeah, I mean, I refer to it as a studio because you got a bedroom, so it's not like a studio apartment.
Yeah.
Just because it looks like a studio, but you spend a lot of time here. You got these nice big windows, and so it's good to have a lot of light in here, natural light as you're doing it. But you're in you step outside your front door here, and you're in a busy part of the world. But it's like your little escape here, like.
Yeah, it's definitely an escape, and I like that I do live in this specific part of Miami because I can walk out and all this life around me. I feel like I'm an actual human again. So, it is very convenient in that regard. And then a lot of people just come here. Like I'll get dinner with friends. Like that'll be sort of my outlet. Like if I'm not going to a show, which like I tend to just have friends who want to see me. Like I'll just come to this art show, and like I can kind of multitask my hangout times. But I'll like get dinner with people, and it's because Brickell has so much pull because it's such a great spot and it has so much life going on. It's I don't have to leave Brickell. I don't have to leave this place because I work so much. So it's so if I ever want to re-involve myself with society, all I have to do is walk out the door.
Yeah, the other cool thing is people walk in the door to look at your art as well, right? Like you might have people that want to check out some art, and here it is. They can come by and see it. You don't have to leave. I mean, and then, I think I asked you this before we started recording, but you seem to have some pretty good turnaround on your art. Like I said, this is your livelihood. You're doing very well selling the art. And this is just an odd question because it's just not something I think about. But do you you've made something, that's it, it's finished. Do you have like a price tag in your mind, like this is what it is, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it just all goes by dimensions. So you have like your price per square inch, and then you calculate that. So it's not like necessarily like, oh, I made this specific piece and this is different value of like one that's the same size. It's always same across the board. So that's really how the pricing goes. But yeah, I mean, I fortunately sell pretty consistently. I really have to like foster sales though. Like it's not something that it's super instantaneous as far as like I make it and I sell it. I have to kind of, again, like involve myself in different ways or get it into people's awareness one way or another. Because I mean, especially right now with the market, it's just not easy at all. So yeah, it does take a lot of input in that regard as far as like trying to foster or find a client. Sometimes I have great collectors too who will buy multiple paintings, and I mean that makes a huge difference. But yeah, it's like you don't have a salary, you don't have a definite source of income, so living with that can be pretty terrifying. And the amount of uncertainty behind this whole career is a huge challenge. But fortunately, like if you can sell the work, then it works out. And like I put a lot of effort into, and I've developed skills, I would say, where that is pretty. I'm capable of doing that. So yeah. So it makes it okay. But if I didn't do those things, then that's sort of like the 100-hour per week thing. Like you have to. You don't have a choice if you want to be an artist. And that's just how it is, and if I wasn't willing to do that, then I'd have to get another job.
Yeah. So also being that Miami's a hot spot and people come here, maybe they come here during Art Basel in December. Maybe they come here for other things. I mean, there's like, I think it's Tech Month in April.
Yeah.
Finance Week, Hedge Fund Week in January, February. So like, there's just all sorts of things going on. A lot of sports, like the Miami Open and the F1 races are in March and April, I think. So you just got like a lot of things going on here. We are a hot spot for a lot of activity. Billionaires frequent Miami, whether they live here or have a home here or come here, 1 month of the year, like all these sorts of things. Mm-hmm. Do you find that as people are passing through Miami, that gives you some opportunities to show them your art in person and sell them your art? Yeah,
there's a lot of people who stop through the city, and maybe a mutual friend will say, hey, I have, a buddy of mine is in town, and have them, they want to come see your studio. So yeah, that definitely happens. That is one great thing about living in Miami. And that was a part of the logic that was applied to moving here. So yeah, it's definitely made a significant difference, and I think it'll continue, especially as things evolve. And I mean, this place just keeps getting cooler and cooler as far as like what I have to show, and I'm stuff slowly making its way up the walls here. Yeah. So it's becoming a really cool spot, and I would say it's definitely worth seeing now and visiting.
So getting back to your actual art. What symbolism is sort of a common theme behind your work?
Yeah, well, these character paintings that I would always draw superheroes and cartoon characters when I was a kid, as usual, as you'd expect, and I made characters that I also came up with on my own, and I think a lot of those elements that created these characters turned into what they are now. But more specifically, I had an apprenticeship with a Pittsburgh artist my sophomore year of college. It was the summer after my sophomore year, actually. And he paints a lot of, since he's a Pittsburgh artist, he paints a lot of steel mill subject matter. And so I always liked painting things that were geometric and just seeing that stuff. And then in the different scenes that he painted, sort of like, I combined all these things and also the stuff from my childhood into this character. So like you'll have a lot of fire in the element of fire, like that's present a lot in the character, because like for one of Corey's steel mill paintings, he has, where the molten steel is being poured into like a mold, flames will shoot out. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I applied it to the character, and like that's often the hair or like the arms is fire sometimes, or like And then I'll have the geometricness of the figure again. Like, you have these steel beams that are very geometric, and they make steel structures, etc. Like, again, that was applied to the character. And then you've, like the multiple eyes. Like, there's a lot of different tropes and anecdotes that applies to, but I think the main one is the story of Ezekiel in the Bible that tells the story of the angel, where you have this wheel of fire that had eyes all over it. So the painting that's behind your left shoulder there, like, that's where you have this wheel-esque reaching of the arms, and you have the eyes along them, like, that was inspired by that story. So, like, again, like, and that goes back to having different experiences or even distractions. Like, I get lost in a story that I find, and that then influences the work. So it really a bunch of random things. And I have, like, right now, I think for someone who really pays, like, I pay a lot of attention to global politics and we have all these wars going on. So I have this kind of very war-esque kind of these elements that are, like, if you think of a tank or something, like, it's sort of like make that apply to the figure, and then that will be, that adds a whole nother kind of interesting details, such as these tracks now. Like, that really came from that idea of tanks and other vehicles that might be used during conflict. So I mean, that's on my mind a lot. There's a ton of things. It's and then you have a lot of the, like, growing up in a Catholic family, like, you have these crosses that I've now been thinking about a lot, and again, which also ties to the story of Ezekiel. There's a lot to them, and it's sort of like each painting will be specifically more towards one subject or the other. But yeah.
Well, you mentioned earlier that, so this is different than realism. Realism is actually depicting. Tell me if I'm getting this wrong, right? But I think it is what it says. Like, you're getting actually, maybe real historical figures you're painting, or a real scene in life that you're painting. Like, this is stuff it's, to me, would almost be like, I mean, obviously, like, all of art is like creative. It's kind of all fiction in a sense. Yeah. But in a sense, this is like the fiction within the fiction. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, so you're creating characters, you're creating stories. So, like, if you were, again, compared to like a writer in some sense, this would be like you're more in the fiction category than the nonfiction category. Yeah. But all of fiction mirrors some level of life. It mirrors war. Yeah. It mirrors love and feelings. All these things. So you're, like, up there. I mean, it sounds like from what you were talking about earlier, like, you're kind of having to come up with these characters and stories that don't exist, like, and put them in real life. But what you're saying here is, but they're inspired by other stories. Maybe this was inspired by something in Ezekiel. Here, this is inspired by your, Catholic faith. War, actual wars going on in the world right now. All these things. But the reason I'm asking you that is, I don't know if you are a reader, as an example, or maybe even just, a watcher of movies, things like that. But are there things that maybe you're absorbing, content you're absorbing, books, movies, whatever, that gives you an idea for a piece of art?
Yeah, I think at the very least it'll add a detail, or, again, I keep saying an element to the painting, but the general story, like general stories or anything like that, I don't think because the character is such a specific and kind of esoteric subject matter that I've just developed, that then you just add sort of like gasoline to the tank as far as, like, evolving the character. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different anecdotes. Like, I like the superhero aspect because growing up I dealt with a lot of bullying, and to have, like, this character that was like a superhero, to, like, kind of like, it's a representation of me to, like, save myself from that, and just gave me, like, that kind of, like, that sort of strength that I wanted or needed, it was like a great way to kind of like it just materialized itself into making art. And like that, you know, if I ever go through difficult times, which are just inevitable, especially if you're trying to be a freaking artist for your career, then to have like this kind of this, like I have this like friend that's just I get to live with, and it's and I get to return to and interact with as I'm making another one. But yeah, I mean, there's just like it's funny, in the more I experience and the more stories I hear, yeah, it definitely evolves and continually develops what it is.
So so as I got to about 100 episodes of my podcast here, I wrote a book called The American Dream is a Terrible Thing to Waste. And in the beginning of the book, I outlined 10 common characteristics of the entrepreneur. You actually already mentioned something in problem solving. That was actually that's number one.
Yeah.
And you talked about that. But as I'm listening to you, one of the characteristics of the entrepreneur I outline, and this is very broadly applied when I say entrepreneur, because you're an entrepreneur, you're an artist, but you're an entrepreneur. I mean, this is your business,
yeah,
and you've got a lot of things going on. But one of the common characteristics I outline is entrepreneurs tend to be curious and creative people. Now, creative, obviously an artist, creative, but I added this curiosity thing because it's, you know, and I'm thinking about a guy who I had on the podcast about 4 years ago, who's also a featured innovator in the community, Alex Goryachev. Alex, at the time I interviewed him, was working for Cisco Systems. He also had a book, before I ever had a name of the community, called Fearless Journeys. He had a book called Fearless Innovation. So we're on a lot of wave levels. You know, I got Agents of Innovation, I got Fearless Journeys.
Yeah.
But he talks in the book about the best thing for people to do if they want to be like successful or entrepreneurial is really to continue to develop what he calls your childlike curiosity. Because when we're born into the world, as we're growing up, if you notice children, when they're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I mean, they just have immense they ask questions about everything, right? It almost sometimes sounds like stupid questions, like, Mom, why is this green? You know, or like whatever. Like they want to know. Once we get to be adults, we got a lot going on. We stop asking so many questions, and maybe we either have it figured out, like we know why this is green or something like that, or we just don't have time to sit and look at the sky and ponder bigger things. But it seems like what's interesting to me is I'm listening to you as an artist. It's almost like you have this so by the way, what Alex says about the childlike, he's like, we have to be more like children I mean, obviously we got to grow up, but we got to we should really exploit that childlike curiosity to be really curious about as many things as possible. And so and that will help us in so many realms. So when he's talking about I just was thinking about you creating this character, and I'm thinking about, is it like the artist never grew up? You know, like you're still like, kids paint, like my 7-year-old niece and my 3.5-year-old nephew. Like man, all I did was buy them, you know, a $5 coloring book. Yeah. And they're busy for like weeks with that thing. And I'm thinking, man, I don't have time to sit there and try to color in the lines. And I couldn't believe how slow they were taking to do like one page, because they were so detailed. I was kind of impressed. But I was just thinking about, you know, it's almost like, yeah, well, here you are as an artist. You never got out of the coloring books and all these sorts of things, but also you're creating characters that maybe go back to something as a child that you just talked about. So what is it about everything I just kind of spilled out there about the that curious and creative nature of, you know, as both an artist and an entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, I think to be an entrepreneur, you have to be curious. You have to be like, all right, I'm going to take the reins here and discover something and figure out answers on my own. And that's all rooted in curiosity. I mean, when I paint, all I do is listen to podcasts. I rarely ever listen to music. People always ask me what I listen to, and it's always
the Agents of Innovation podcast.
Yes,
right?
Of course. And because, yeah, I mean, that's an example of curiosity that I have personally. And yeah, I think, yeah, to have this tendency to be like, to be in a way just interested in things is what leads to maybe creating a business. have this interest in art, and that's what it all came from. And I mean, I think very specifically to this, my main business is something that I essentially did when I was a kid. I did carry that through. So you're completely right. And I think a lot of those proclivities and qualities that I think are very present inherently when you're a child, then, I think particularly stayed very present in what I do. But, it's with that all as well that those experiences and those in those moments where you find something that is inspirational, that you come across along a journey of curiosity is what also informs things and allows them to develop more, such as, as we're running through the different inspirations behind the work. Like that's only because of, one, the curiosity, but also that, like, growing up as well.
Yeah. So Joe, I think we've heard a lot about your journey here. It's been really incredible. Everything from your childhood, maybe your continued childhood here, your childlike curiosity.
I feel like a kid.
Yeah. moving to Miami, being here a little more than a year now, and doing all your work right from this studio, your home studio, and being able to sell your art, make a living. Really great for you to be doing that, including in a challenging economy in 2024, right?
Doesn't
it's
help.
Not exactly easy.
Does not help.
Yeah, but anyway, it's been great getting to know you over the last year. I'm glad Ronak put us in touch.
Likewise, yeah.
And I hope, I think this is just the beginning. I really wanted to get this interview in at the beginning of your career, so I could say, hey, I interviewed that guy in 2024.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, so I think we'll come back. We'll probably have some updates in the future. We're going to have you interact with some of our members as a featured innovator in the Fearless Journeys community. So again, if you're listening to this and it's before October 28th or watching it, definitely go visit fearlessjourneys.org, and you'll get a chance to sit down across the dinner table from Joe and a few other members of our featured innovators of our community, and a bunch of other members of our community. I think at this point we got like a total of 14 of us signed up for that dinner.
Nice.
So it's going to be fun. Great Argentinian food. But Joe, any parting comments, words of wisdom at the ripe old age of 24 that you want to give to our audience?
I don't know. I think, I have great parents, and I was actually set on getting another job to really make it work. And they're like, I think my dad in particular was like, I can tell how much you care about this. And since you're so interested and love it so much, and he knows my work ethic, he's like, you're going to make it work. And he was right. And so I think, I have a lot of friends who ask me, and I think, it's very applicable to my age demographic, where it's like, what should I do with myself as far as career goes? And if the more rooted it can be in something you're interested in, the more fruitful your life will be. Yeah. So
that's great. Well, I know you went to college. A lot of young people, a lot of parents, they feel like the only thing that their child should do when they hit 18 and graduate high school is go to college. Otherwise, that's like the natural next step. But I think also there's so your parents supported your journey through college, I'm sure, and you did, and you graduated from Penn State. But I think also there's a lot of room for parents to be supportive and invest in their kids in other ways, whether they went to college or not. And it sounds like your parents said, hey, go for it. They were very supportive of you in this effort. And by the way, what's the worst that can happen? That's the way I kind of looked at starting Fearless Journeys.
Yeah.
So maybe I go back to doing another kind of more normal job that I work for someone else. There's millions of jobs in the United States. It's a land of opportunity. May not be the most ideal thing I want to be doing at the moment, but let's take this leap. And I'm glad you did, because you have a lot of great work to prove for it. One thing I was going to mention, just so if anybody's watching this, and I should have said this at the beginning, I think almost all the work in the background of where this video is pointing is your work, but this sculpture is not. That's on the table.
No.
Tell us, you do have a few other pieces of art in here from other artists, but tell us about this sculpture that you did not create.
Ryan Schneider is an amazing artist. he makes these sculptures. Obviously, he carves them with the chainsaw out of big blocks of wood, and then he paints them. And he's very well known, and he's become a friend of mine. And him and then some other artists now I have that I get to live with. It has a lot of utility as far as like it's allowed me to become close with these people, and then also just to be inspired by their work has made a big difference. But this is Ryan Schneider specifically, and
also I have a funny story that I should have brought up before too. So 10 months ago, the Miami Book Fair, by the way, for those who aren't aware, it's a really great event that takes place in November. In fact, I'm going to interview an author coming up on a future episode who will be featured at this year's Miami Book Fair. It's usually takes place around November 17th through the 25th, somewhere in that period. But you can Google it. But last year at the Miami Book Fair, I was paired up to interview a few authors, and they sent me some of the authors' books ahead of time. And one of the books that really captivated my attention was Chris Wilson. Mm-hmm. And Chris, I read his entire book. He actually served time in prison, I think 16 years, from the time he was about 19, I think, onward. And incredible book. It's called the Master Plan. The Master Plan. And he literally made, after a few years of being depressed, you get in prison, you're 19, you think and actually he was sentenced to a life in prison. Yeah. So, but he turned his entire life around in prison and wrote a plan on what he was going to do to get out. And what was incredible is he really grew to love doing art, I think, while he was in prison. And actually is now an artist in Miami. But what's funny is so I read his book. I interviewed Chris in person at the Miami Book Fair. We had a great conversation. You could go back on one of the previous episodes of this podcast. And then as I'm going to promote the episode, I started following Chris on Instagram, and I saw that you two were following each other, and I thought, I wonder if Joe knows him, because they're both artists. And I had just met you a few months earlier. Yeah. And you did, and you said you were like very close.
Chris is a very good friend of mine. Yeah. Yes, it is a good story. Chris is great. He's a great guy. His story is amazing. The book is great. But yeah, he's doing well. He was one of the first people I met when I moved to Miami.
Yeah, and what's interesting, you read his book, you read his master plan that he actually wrote. Like it's not like he made it up later. Like he has the receipts. Yeah. And people in prison just thought he was crazy. He wanted to live a life of lots of travel. I mean, he literally wrote that he wanted to be like in Barcelona, and I think he wanted to buy a Corvette.
He owns a Corvette now, yeah.
I think what he learned later was the material things that he thought he wanted. It was great to have them because it's like he checked it off the list. Yeah. But like me, he really values experiences more. So, and I follow him on Instagram now, and I don't know how many times he goes down to Colombia.
He travels every week.
He goes all sorts of places.
He's a madman.
I'll have to reconnect with Chris in person at some point. I know that he had a studio in Wynwood, and I think he just moved it recently to Little Haiti, which is like the next kind of burgeoning spot here in Miami. Yeah. So, but anyway, look, we have all these great connections. I think that's one of the great things when you start to connect with a lot of these really innovative entrepreneurs. You start to see what connections they have and what ideas and the types of people that they surround themselves by as well. So it was kind of neat to see that. But Joe, I just want to say thank you. This has been a pleasure being welcomed into your home, into your art studio, and to see what you're making of it. And so I just want to say thanks for being on the Agents of Innovation podcast, and thanks for being an agent of innovation yourself.
Thank you. It's great to see you as always. I enjoyed this.
All right, sounds good. We'll see you all soon, and make sure you subscribe to the Agents of Innovation podcast. And write us a review while you're at it.